Hello all, welcome to the last in a little mini series of videos from me. My first videos on my channel, so I will, as I have in all of mine, apologise in advance. I'm not a professional YouTuber. This is just so people can have a look at these watches. Don't expect this to be very well put together. Just off the cuff, me giving my thoughts about these. So I've done a mini series of reviewing each one of these watches. All GMT dive style watches, worth under £1,000, around £600 to £900 in fact. And I've given you my thoughts on them individually, so I thought I'd compare them all together now. So we have on the left here the Laurier Hyperion GMT, quite a new watch from the microbrand Laurier. The Baltic Aquascaphe GMT, quite a new watch from the microbrand Baltic. And the Steinhart Ocean 39 GMT 500 Premium, something like that. Type most of those words in and it will come up on Google, I'm sure. From the sort of microbrand Steinhart. It's been out for a little while, this one. So there's a lot of comparisons you can make between these watches. They, in many ways, are competing in the same area of the market for these GMT dive watch, Rolex GMT Master inspired watches in the sort of upper end of the affordable scale, pre-luxury, from these mostly respected microbrands. These two in particular, very popular microbrands amongst enthusiasts. This brand, Steinhart, obviously draws some flack for certain reasons. You can watch the individual review on that one for a bit more on that. I rambled on about that a bit. So firstly, for the similarities, they're all 39mm GMT Rolex-ish homage style dive watches. Not all dive watches, as we will come to. They're all around the same thickness. Steinhart's 13mm, the Baltic is 12, and the Laurier is 10.7, so 11. So 13, 12, 11 basically. Lug on these two guys is 47. Couldn't find it online, haven't bothered to measure it, but it's around the same from looking at it. It won't be more than 48mm maybe on the Steinhart. All of 20mm lug widths, tapering down. These two taper down to 16, this guy, or these two taper down to 16, this guy to 18. They're all fully loomed, bezel and all. What else is similar? That's maybe where the similarities end. So as I've said, these are definitely in competition, these guys. They're in a very similar price bracket. So we'll go through almost a TGV style. I won't get the notepad out, but put these in competition for each of the sorts of general categories that I've put together here. And then I can come to some sort of a conclusion of my personal favourites, and you can come to your own conclusions. Okay, so where do we start? Well, the first thing on the watch that you come to is the crystal. So we'll start with the crystal. So both of these guys have sapphire crystals. This guy's an acrylic crystal. What you're going to notice as we go on is there a theme develops here where this fella, the Steinhart, arguably, in fact, it's not really that arguable, has the best feature list for the price, for sure, has the best list of features for the price. This guy arguably has the worst set of features for the price. This guy is a middle ground. However, there's definitely reasons to go for this guy over this guy, as I will come to. So, two sapphire crystals, acrylic crystal. Baltic doesn't mention anti-reflective coating. Give it a bit of a twist in the light. You can see the blue anti-reflective coating. I'll lift these closer up to the camera now. You can see the blue anti-reflective coating working there on the Steinhart. You can see there isn't much on the Baltic. You get quite a lot of reflections there. And then the acrylic on the Laurier naturally should give a few less reflections, although it doesn't seem to make much difference here. In fact, you can definitely see through that crystal a lot easier on the Laurier. At this angle here, the Baltic, the indices are unreadable, but those hands are still shining. All of them are very visible, really, in most lights. They're all pretty visible watches. Obviously, again, the Steinhart may be the most visible. It's definitely the sportiest watch. It's definitely the most practical, probably, out of these watches, the Steinhart, as we will come on to, as I've said. We'll do Lume at the end, but this guy's got BGW9, this guy's got C3 and BGW9, this guy's got C1. So this glows blue, this glows green, this glows blue and green. You will see later. It's quite interesting on this guy. So going back to the crystals, there's pros and cons to acrylic. So for those who don't know, acrylic scratch is a lot easier than sapphire. It's a lot softer. It's essentially plexiglass, it's plastic. But it won't shatter like sapphire can, and it gives it that vintage theme. So the Laurier in particular is definitely going for that vintage look. It's an homage to the, rather than one watch in particular, so there's an era, the 50s, 60s. Don't hold me to the dates of the first Rolex GMTs. The handset actually looks more Omega-esque, but it's sort of playing on that whole era. The Steinhart on the other hand is more of an homage to the modern GMT masters, much more sporty. You know, the crown guards make it a much more practical watch, but that depends what you're looking for. I myself quite like the vintage themes. Okay, again, I'll say it one more time, apologise about the quality of this, I'm rambling up through it, just stick with me. So we'll take these out and we'll look at them individually quickly. So the bezel is the next thing up. So again, the Steinhart wins on features, probably, just about, yeah, because it has a fully ceramic, fully loomed bezel, which is a very nice action. Maybe it doesn't win on features actually, it's going to come second, I like to say that. Very nice action to this bezel, but unidirectional. I've just realised I said in my Steinhart video earlier that I would give my reasons for why I think that is. I never did, so I'll give them here. This watch, as we will come on to, can be used as a dive watch. It is a dive watch. In fact, it's a very capable dive watch. But if you're going to use a watch as a dive watch, it has to be unidirectional. If a bezel is bidirectional, you can risk knocking it, not realising you've been in the water as long as you can. That can be dangerous. I'm a scuba diver. I've worn this scuba diving quite a few times. I do a lot of scuba diving when I can, less now that I'm living here in Wales. But that for me is a reason why they could have left the bezel as is, because to give it this water resistance leads you to think, as we'll come on to, 500 meters water resistance, leads you to think they expect people to actually use this diving. Hence why they could have left the unidirectional bezel. The more pessimistic point of view would be to think they've just copied over the bezel from their other ocean line watches, non-GMT watches, and not bothered to make a new bezel bidirectional, as is to be expected in a normal GMT watch. So I'll leave that to you to decide. But ceramic bezel insert, which is very good, you know, won't scratch, very difficult to damage. Onto the Baltic. Well, the Baltic has a sapphire covered, fully loomed bezel. It is bidirectional, it's 24 click, so it's not very useful for timing if you wanted to use this watch for timing, but it's incredibly useful as a GMT watch, you know, jump from hour to hour. Really nice action, not too much play at all, bidirectional. Yeah, really solid click to it. I've never had a 24 click bidirectional bezel before. I like it a lot. Feels very strange at first, but I like it a lot. Moving on to the Laurier. Laurier falls massively down, unfortunately, in this category when looking at the bezel, mostly because of the bezel action. It's the thinnest bezel of all, so you would expect it perhaps to be the most difficult to turn, but I've had corn edge bezels before and perfectly fine turning them. This guy, that was actually okay there. It does not feel nice to turn at all. It's got a lot of play. And turning it backwards in particular, like I'm really trying my best there. Oh, I don't know if it's just my watch. You know, I feel bad having a go. You can see how much it's dug into my fingers just trying to turn it there. Being a GMT watch, you don't need to turn the bezel very often, but being a watch lover, I play with my bezel. Play with my bezel all the time. The bezel action is pretty dreadful on this, unfortunately. Also, I would say the yellowish hint to the indices, which is meant to give it that Bakelite look, definitely catches that Bakelite look, but doesn't match the indices on the dial. I think it looks a little strange to me. As I also mentioned in my individual review of this, the red on there is barely a red. It doesn't match the GMT red. It's more of a brown, maroon. I like the toned down colours, but just for personal taste, I would have had that red just a little bit more vibrant. It's definitely the least vibrant, stands out the least of these three watches for sure. But arguably the nicest styling, you know, nicest general aesthetics. But there you go, it's dropped down a level on the bezel. Finishing, I'll take these out one by one again. The Steinhart, not very well finished. Polished sides, brushed on top, very utilitarian. The bezel, the bracelet, I think I said it was all brushed last time. It's actually polished sides, they're just so scratched up, a little more difficult to tell. Yeah, finishing is very standard on this boy. The Baltic. Nicer finishing, but still very standard. No polished edge, much nicer brushing than the Steinhart for sure. Catches the light nicer. But there's no real polishing anywhere on the case itself. Beads of rice bracelet. As polishing up the center link. We'll come to the bracelet actually in a second. Sign crown, as is the Steinhart. Unlike the Steinhart, no crown guards, going for that vintage look again. But I will say the crown's a really good size on this and pops out nicely. The crown on the Steinhart, a little small for my liking. It looks a little dainty. And then the Laurier, the best finishing of the three probably. Nice brushing, so we can give this a rub down. Nice brushing, nice chamfered polished edge on the case there. We'll come on to the bracelet, but that's really nice finished. We've got screwed lug holes, or drilled lug holes I should say, as you do on the Baltic as well. Don't get that on the Steinhart, so maybe there's one feature the Steinhart does not have over these two. So finishing wise, that one, the Laurier wins. Give that one to Laurier for sure. Onto the bracelets. So the Steinhart comes standard on a oyster style bracelet. This Jubilee is around 60-70 pounds extra, I believe. It's actually quite a nice bracelet, I will say. Screwed links, polished sides. You know, the finishing isn't wonderful, but the actual build quality is a very solid. You know, it's not too jangly or anything at all. Very solid bracelet. It's actually a much better. I like the way it folds down. You get this first link folds down nicely, so you can fold it flat to the wrist, or conforms nicely to the wrist. It's actually much better than, say, the Stratco Jubilees you can get. I actually prefer it to them. However, the clasp, for a start, picks up scratches a lot. I've worn this watch, yeah, quite a lot, but not that much for it to be that scratched. Very generic clasp that you see on a lot of microbrands or cheap microbrands. When you're paying this much for the watch, I suppose you're not paying it for the clasp, you're paying it for the rest of the watch. But you know, this bracelet's a 60-70 pound add-on. Not a huge fan of the clasp. It's got plenty of micro adjusts and the links are nice and short, so you'll never get the wrong fit. But that's that bracelet. Probably the worst bracelet here, if I'm honest. In fact, almost definitely the worst bracelet here. The Baltic has a lovely beads of rice bracelet. You don't see a beads of rice very often. It's a little thin. I would have it slightly thicker. It's also push pins instead of screws, but I think that's more to do with the thinness of the watch, of the bracelet. Screwed, goes in with screwed, drilled lug ends, as I've said. It gets the added bonus feature of a quick adjust, not quick adjust, you know what I mean. Quick release, that's the phrase. Easy to put in, slightly more, bear with me, slightly more challenging to put back on, especially when filming on camera, but not too, there you go, look at that, straight back on. Really nicely finished, brushed on the outside, polished center links. Each one of these beads, sorry if I keep missing the camera, each one of these beads is lovely. The clasp is just a friction clasp. Could have been nice to see some buttons on there, but I actually prefer it to a fold over clasp. I think it gives it a really nice, clean aesthetic. It's a very thin clasp itself, but I think that helps it sit thinner to the wrist. It's just a pressed clasp there, but again, I think that's, yes, it will save costs, but I think in some ways intentional to help it sit thin to the wrist. Really nice action when it closes up, plenty of micro adjusts, small links anyway. Very good beads arrives bracelet, it is. Hands down, the best bracelet in this watch roll is on the Laurier though. So the Laurier has, start with the clasp this time. It's really short, small clasp with a nice, I like the Laurier logo, the chevrons on there, push to release. None of them have any on-the-go adjustments. This does only have 3 micro adjusts, but as I said in the individual review, these bracelets links are so short that doesn't matter at all. I've heard people complain about not being able to get a fit. I'm sorry, you are being very pedantic. If you cannot get a fit on this watch, you can adjust, you know, by the millimeter pretty much. The bracelet itself is amazing. I love it. I'll try and get this back in the middle of the kit. I'm putting it to one side because I can't actually see the middle of my screen. The way I've got this set up, I can see the side, so I apologize about that. But this bracelet, almost like a tank tracks. Love how you can do that. Feels great to play with. Sharply machined, but smoothed on the underside so it doesn't dig into the wrist too much. Tapers down from 20 to 16. Back up to 18-ish, maybe 20. 18-ish for the clasp. Yeah, a really nice bracelet. It conforms to the wrist so nicely. When I have this watch on, I find myself taking it off a lot just to play with the bracelet. All brushed, really nice brushing. Yeah, I love it. Screw links as well. Yeah, easily the best bracelet. So Laurier is winning that one. So far we've got the Laurier head-on finishing, and on the bracelets, we've got the Steinhart head on the features maybe. But I think the Baltic's winning. I can't really give a good reason why the Baltic's winning. I prefer the Baltic, is what I'm going to come to, is eventually concluding this video. I do prefer the Baltic. It's definitely got the best bezel action. Probably the best bezel in general, actually. I also quite like the orange colours on there, I must say. It's quite individual, but I've warmed to it more and more to the point where I really love it now. As I said in the Baltic video, that colour combination gives it almost looks like it's a faded version of a Pepsi bezel, you know? In the right light, it almost looks like a faded red rather than orange. I really like that. Obviously with the Steinhart, this is obviously the most individual, original colour combination. Steinhart obviously going off that Batman look, the Laurier going off those original Pepsi bezel, a very dull version of a Pepsi bezel. If I haven't mentioned already, I should mention, not a fan of this very, very dull red. I'd like it slightly more vibrant, I will say, on this. So this is my favourite colour combination. That's very derivative, so there's not much to say about that. It looks good on the Batman. If you like it on the Batman, you'll like it on this. It looks the same. This, going for that Bakelite look, those vintage Rolexes, it's nice. I'd like it slightly more vibrant myself. Moving on, water resistance. So 100 meters, 100 meters, 500 meters. So these are not dive watches. You can't use them diving. This is a dive watch. 500 meters on a GMT watch, which, by the way, as we're going to come on to, has a display case back. I don't think there's another watch in the world I can think of immediately that has that level of water resistance with a GMT functionality with a display case back. I do like a display case back. Not always my preference, but I'll never say no to one. So Steinhart, once again, winning for utility, maybe is the way to say it. Movements, all Swiss. These two both have SOP rods, C125s. I'm going to be honest, don't know much about movements. They all run well, except for this guy. So this guy is a Swiss, either ETA or Solita SW, something. Labouré movement, which is basically Steinhart supposedly pimping it out. This guy's running 80 odd seconds slow, so there's something up with the movement in this. I need to take it in. If I'm not just going to sell it, I suppose no one's going to buy it running 80 seconds slow, but I need to take that in for a service because it's obviously something wrong with it. Both of these run really well. This guy is running within a second, this guy within 5-ish. So both running well. And finally, we'll do the display the case backs first. So as you've seen, display case back on this guy. It's really nice. You get some blue screws. Looks like there's blue anti-reflective coating on that. That's a sapphire crystal in the back there. Gold rotor, custom rotor with the crown cut out. I'm not sure how much you can see here, guys. I apologise if it's not very good once again. But yeah, I like a display case back. I liked that when I wanted this watch. I was just getting into watches. I wanted to see what's going on. To think that's the only one with the water resistance to actually be used as a dive watch. In fact, 5 times the water resistance of these two, and it managed to have a display case back. Very impressive. This probably my favorite display case, favorite case back of the lot. I can show you it very easily thanks to that system. This has a useful function to it. It basically shows you how the time zones compare depending on where you are in the world. So if you go back to up to the 24 there, you should see London next to it, Paris 1 hour ahead, Cairo is at 2 hours ahead. I'm trying to read it through my phone, sorry, Moscow 3 hours ahead, etc. And then back the other way, you've got New York somewhere, should be 4 or 5 hours behind, right? There it is, 19, 5 hours behind. Yeah, so very useful whilst you're traveling. If you're stopping off somewhere, you want to know how the time zones are different, just check your watch, don't need to check your phone. Sorry about the shaking camera, just knocks my crappy stand. There we go. Took me a minute to get that back in. And then, last but not least, rephrase that, last but least, depends what you're into, very plain case back on this Laurier. It uses the Laurier chevron logo to make that circle. I actually quite like it for a plain case back, because to me it's almost reminiscent of the tool marks on a Rolex case back. I've actually got my Tudor right here so I can show you by comparison. It reminds me of that tool, you know, that tool shape that you get on Rolex and Tudor watches, and considering this is essentially homaging the same era of watches just without the GMT function, you can see the comparable bit coinage bezels there. Yeah, I quite like it. Whilst this is out, I'll do another, as I did in the individual video, comparison. It's not just because the bezel's thin that it's hard to turn, you know. Here's obviously 10 times the price, this watch. Arguably the best bezel I've ever played with on my BlackBerry 58. Stays at the top. It's harder to turn in the first position, but you know, comparing that very expensive watch to this, absolutely no comparison. It is really the biggest letdown of this watch is the bezel, at least on my model. Like to think it's just a mistake with mine. I really can't be bothered sending it back to America to have them look at it and tell me, nope, it's just how we made it. Okay, so last thing I'll compare, the price. So the Steinhart without this Jubilee bracelet, with the standard bracelets, is around £620, I believe. Is that correct? Bear with me a minute, I may be wrong there now that I'm thinking. Does that sound right? £620, it's quite expensive for a Steinhart, isn't it? Double checking, no, I was correct. So it's, oh, sorry about this people, bear with me. Really should have prepared this before. Okay, I'm just going to believe what I've put here. £620 for that. The Jubilee bracelet's around a £60 add-on, so you're getting towards 700. The Laurier is actually the cheapest of the lot, which is £579. However, if you're ordering to England or to the UK, do bear in mind the import taxes are rather extortionate from America. I think I paid almost £150 in import tax for that, which brings it up to near 700. But if you compare straight up without that, around £100 cheaper this Laurier than the Steinhart. And then the Baltic's the most expensive of the lot. It's £815 roughly on the rubber strap, which it comes as standard. If you want this beads of rice, you need to pay around, again, £70 extra. Brings it up closer to 900. So this is, you know, almost around £200 more than both these watches. So it should be the best, given that. To me it is. To me this is my favourite out of the three. You might not agree with me. It's very personal reasons for thinking that, but, you know, particular choices. But for me, this is my favourite watch. The Steinhart, easily the best feature-packed. Ceramic bezel, fully lumed, anti-reflective coating on that sapphire crystal, GMT function, display case back, 500 meters water resistant, so it actually works as a dive watch. You know, crown guards and thicker bezel make it just more functional in every way, unless you want a bi-directional bezel. However, for build quality, you know, bear in mind the movement's messed up in this. If you actually, you know, look at them up close, you look at the indices, you look at everything, build quality wise, it's probably the lowest standard here. So it depends what you want. It's also the modern styled out of these three. I prefer a vintage look. So it's between these two, fight it out. This guy, you know, the acrylic crystal, some people like it. I don't mind it. At the end of the day, I would prefer a sapphire crystal. It's just, I prefer the you know, it makes it feel, almost cheapens the watch a little bit. An acrylic crystal, I find, you know, plexiglass feels plasticky, you know. I do prefer sapphire. The bezel action really ruins it for me. The bezel action's terrible. It's a really nice watch though, otherwise. Looks amazing, I will say. But the Baltic, to me, is the perfect in-between. You know, it's functional, it's sapphire crystal, you know, robust, got this thick bezel, really good action, which works very well as a GMT watch. Obviously not as a dive watch, but really you don't need a GMT function on your watch if you're scuba diving, you know, although it is nice if you're going on holiday. But really you don't need that. So it's not a dive watch. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to personal choice. So they're three very closely comparable watches in the same sort of price range, between 600 and 900. Three micro brands, all offering similar things. My favorite, definitely the Baltic. I would say my least favorite, probably the Steinhart. It's probably the most derivative, you would say. Cheapest build quality in some senses. Definitely the worst finishing, but in other senses, packed with features. The brand, I do have an issue with the brand. I do have an issue with a lot of their other watches. You know, an issue is the wrong word, but it does muddy the water a bit when most of their watches are essentially straight copies. You know, none of their own styling whatsoever, most of their watches. This one, definitely more of an homage than a copy, but that always will rest on my mind. Hopefully, most of you don't have that same weakness that I have, because it is a weakness. But yeah, by far my favourite, the Baltic. I haven't actually compared how they wear on wrist, but they're all pretty similar. I won't put them all on. I'm going to finish by putting the Baltic on. This arguably wears the tallest. I mean, it is the tallest of the three by a millimetre or so. Wears the tallest, but it still wears great. Like, I have no problem with any of them. Maybe wears the biggest, this one. The Laurier probably wears the smallest, definitely wears the thinnest. It is the thinnest. So it's up to you, really. It's what you prefer. I'll do Lume at the end any second, so I'm going to walk around my room. If you watched any of my videos, I'm going to close my curtains and turn my light on. I'm not a professional. So give me a moment. If I was a professional, I would cut my video, but I can't be bothered. Okay, the biggest issue I'm having now is finding the torch. Can't find the torch anyway, so we're going to Lume it with a lamp instead. Professionally done, look at this. I do have a very useful UV torch somewhere, but I've just put it down somewhere and I can't find it in time. So we're just going to Lume these up a little with this lamp. Okay, I think that's pretty even. So, there we go, have a look. So I would say, again, the most expensive watch probably is the best Lume, the Baltic. And the cheapest watch probably has the worst Lume in the Laurier. However, the Laurier has C3 and BGW9. So the C3 is on the bezel and on the GMT hand, which I quite like that, matching the bezel, and then the normal indices, the normal time, are in blue. Easy way to tell the difference between the two time zones. I really like that. Quite an uneven application though. The hands, maybe the things that matter the most, the hands, definitely the GMT hands, the brightest there. The rest of it, the bezel in particular, quite dull. The Baltic's got a really nice layer of C1 on there, really nice application. And then the Steinhart's very solid as well, lots of BDW9 on there, glowing nice and blue, matching the Batman theme. Okay, so turn this light on to finish. Thanks very much for watching. I'm hoping this isn't too terrible a quality video. It's given you a chance to compare these three watches, which in many ways are competing with each other. For the crown as the best GMT dive style watch below 1,000. For me, it's this Baltic. Maybe the colours will put some people off, but it's my favourite of the watches, I will say. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.